Oh my god, a guy at the gym yesterday interrupted me mid lifting, telling me, oh, if you keep doing that, you're going to be in a wheelchair by the time you're 40. I'm like, bro, I'm nearly 40 now, and you're the size of my leg. Shut up. But the lift was lat raises with 4-kilo dumbbells that I was just doing high rep just for like kind of like a burnout session.
Yeah, just say off and they
get the out of here. And do always add the you're the size of my leg, like even if they're bigger than you. So
calm talking to Eddie Hall like that.
he's the shortest tall man in the world. He's like 6'3". He don't look it. He looks like 5'2".
That's because he's like 5'8" across. Yeah, you have really, really nice hair, Legion.
Yeah.
I've never seen Legion's head.
Yeah, it's just I shave it.
I've never had 100% view of Legion's head.
Why did you need the follow-up image there?
Because it was there.
Hey, maybe you didn't get a good enough shot of his hair in the first one.
Yeah, look at the hair.
Here's a picture of him wearing a Speedo.
Before we begin, the Gamer's Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Whoa, wait, before the episode, let's record some of the episode.
Damn, he's got a point.
Well, welcome on in to yet another episode of the Gamer's Advocate podcast. Yay!
Come on.
Yeah. We're welcomed with Banana Hammock Republic and AMKomnenos, the glorious return of AMKomnenos, and myself, Legion. And today we are going to be discussing, just some tutorials. Tutorials, we've all played them. Some of them we like, some of them we hate. Kind of an overview of some of the things that are preferable in them, maybe some that we could have done without, whatnot. But before we do all that, we have a game we play from time to time called That's Nice. And where we say nothing but nice things about a particular game, and it could be a game that we like or we don't like. I think we try to start off with a game that we typically didn't like, but of course there's always going to be some people who do like it, and they're like, well, why did you have to struggle to say nice things about it? So we don't want to alienate anything. We can always say nice things about games that we do like, but today we picked one that we all have played. It's called Dave the Diver. Glorious Dave. So who wants to start us off for that one?
So I think with Dave the Diver, we've talked about how the character of Dave is introduced, and I think it's pretty immediately he's just kind of a likable guy, because he's never, his character is pretty much just, oh, I guess I'll just help. That's the entirety of the game. There's no point where Dave's character really goes beyond that. He's never really arrogant. He's never really abrasive. And there are definitely times where other characters will react to him rather harshly and unfairly. And he just kind of goes with the flow. He's just very matter of fact about things. And I think that makes for an interesting main character for a game. It also, it kind of puts you in this situation where you as the player have reactions to characters that your playable character doesn't really, because when you put yourself in that position and people are kind of like disrespectful or needlessly rude, you kind of resent them. And Dave doesn't really do that. And then moments later, when Dave has accomplished pretty incredible tasks, those people suddenly respect him and they're appreciative of his efforts. And it's like, oh yeah, so I was gonna punch that dude in the face, but apparently just being a better person than him works, so maybe I should have tried that. I thought that was a pretty cool way to approach character growth in a game. It's just to kind of have your main character always be the better person.
Yeah, for me, it's much simpler, and I think for me, it's more gameplay. And it's something we talked about before with Hollow Knight as well, is the game makes things feel good when you do them. And if you think, for example, in Hollow Knight, when you parry someone, you get that wonderful ping sound effect, and you get that moment of, yeah. You get that every single time you line up the harpoon in Dave the Diver. And that little slowing down, and I think if I remember correctly, the camera zooms in maybe even a little bit. And there's just this string of really cool little feedback moments that make actually firing the harpoon feel good. And it's fun to do, yeah. To the point that when I'm doing other parts of the game, I'm actively looking forward to just getting back down in the water. And sorry for the poor little fish who actually aren't that valuable, but if you swim past me when I've got that harpoon, everything is getting harpooned. Because the harpooning feels so good. So for me, it's the force feedback, the player feedback of the main gameplay loop, I think is really beautiful in Dave the Diver.
Yeah, especially there's a value to doing even the little fish, because when you collect enough of them and you put them on the menu, you can upgrade them versus putting them directly on the menu. And that allows you to get more revenue back, and it allows you to do less back and forth between just going to the ocean and to your restaurant. So there's a immediate impact to the gameplay of the restaurant portion of the game.
Yeah.
So if you want to like unlock these ingredients, or if you want to unlock this menu listing, because you have I think it's Cooksta is your kind of like the Instagram thing of that, so they rate you, and as you get better ratings, you unlock other menu options, so you're able to get more money faster, and it's just there's this whole loop to it that feels very rewarding. So even doing the simpler things gives you immediate feedback. There's so much within Dave the Diver. It's such a complex game, and when that game was coming out, it was an indie dev, and I knew about it, and I fired it up as a demo, and I think I was telling Banana when I was, Banana, you gotta play this game. This is a really great game. I think this could be a game of the year type game. And I think it won indie game of the year, I think, but I thought it should have been. Yeah, I think it should have probably have been nominated, because there's nothing really about it that's, the pacing is good. The extra little things that they add, like the sea farms and stuff like that, get added later. So once you know the cycle and you know what you're supposed to be doing, and then you kind of get good at that, then they integrate something else. It's not like here's everything all at one time.
That's something I was going to discuss, was especially since the topic of today is tutorials. I think Dave the Diver is a game that doesn't need a great deal of explanation for the core game mechanics. So it just kind of, it gives you just enough to get involved in the game. And then everything that's like a little more complex gets presented in a way that's very digestible in that moment. And you can very quickly expand your previous knowledge to kind of capture whatever new function is being added. And I think that's something that's really great for a game like Dave the Diver, where the core gameplay is relatively simple. Go collect fish. Pretty straightforward. If I have a 45-minute tutorial on a game where the objective is go collect fish, we're going to have a problem. And Dave the Diver doesn't make that mistake. It's, go collect fish. Here's how to use your harpoon.
We are going to talk about tutorials in game. Yay! We love tutorials.
Everyone's favorite topic.
I was playing the first Berserker Khazan. I know you guys haven't played it yet, but that one was one where it kind of just dropped you in. And there are little pop-ups every once in a while that says you can do this and do that. But if you're familiar with any type of action play or Souls game, you're going to be familiar with a lot of those things. But the combat is a little bit faster. So if you like Souls, you're probably going to really like Khazan, because it does integrate some of those. but you can parry quite a bit. You can choose your fighting style quite a lot. There's a lot of skills that are implemented that are not just Souls derivative, but of the action RPG side of things too. You can choose to either have like a fast weapon type or a very heavy weapon type. And the game's not like saying, hey, look, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, it's just more or less like a tutorial that's on the left side of the screen, but it kind of takes for granted that you already know what to do, and it lets you kind of figure it out. But it's such a fast moving game that I think a tutorial in that situation would just simply slow it down, and it would not be consistent with the type of game that it is. And I thought it was just done masterfully well. It was my pick of game of the year before Expedition 33 came out, and I still think it is a fabulous game. It's definitely one worth playing. It has that, a lot of times people have referred to it as like that anime style, but it's more of like to me it's like more of a graphic novel. It's a great presentation game. It's a great story, and yeah, I think it's actually based on a graphic novel series. So, but anyway, the tutorial of it looks really, it was done really well, I think. So
I love that you were out there making your pick on Game of the Year in March. I think it's the kind of game where it knows its audience, and it knows the kind of player that it wants, and it knows that people generally who haven't picked up an action game like this before are probably not going to be picking this up as their first, so they likely feel that they have almost the implicit right to bypass a tutorial in the way that Dark Souls has traditionally bypassed tutorials. There might be something where you walk past a text box on the ground, and when you interact, it'll say, move the left stick to move. And you're thinking, well, bro, I already moved here, so thanks. It's really not meant to teach you how to play the game. It's more a quick recap. And maybe for players who are new to this game but not new to the genre, it just gives them a quick reminder of, okay, what exactly do the trigger buttons do? Because we know triggers probably attack, but how exactly do they do it? And now, what about the blocking and so forth? But I thought it was interesting that with Elden Ring, they actually did take a step forward and build something of a tutorial area into the game. And it still, to a degree, suffers from the idea that they expect players to have played games before, so it doesn't really do much to handhold a real beginner. But they do take more of a step in that direction, which really makes sense because that's what that game was about, right? That game was the transition more towards a mainstream market than Dark Souls ever was. If you go back and you see when Elden Ring was being released, you'd see promos for it. You'd see in sports, you'd see it along the side of like the advertising hoardings, you would see Elden Ring coming out. You never saw that for Dark Souls, you never saw that for Bloodborne. So they add in this tutorial section, which I thought was great. But I do feel that it's not a particularly well done tutorial, as most tutorials aren't. And as we go further and further into the topic, I think we'll probably talk about quite a few ways that tutorials can generally be improved. But one thing that I would really love to see, and I think not enough games do, is variable tutorials. And this is going to be tutorial in the game for someone who's never played a game before, tutorials in the game for someone who's played a game but isn't really in this genre, tutorials for someone who's used to this kind of game, and a tutorial for someone who's played the game already, which basically means skip the tutorial. I would love to see games actually adapt their tutorials so that they fit the level of everyone who might be playing this game. Because like we said before, for every single game that comes out, it's someone's first game somewhere. There's so many people playing games around the world. And if your first game is Dark Souls 3, well, kind of lucky you and unlucky you. Because if you manage to get into it and enjoy the game, you're going to have the time of your life. And you're going to see what gaming can actually produce. On the other hand, if that tutorial, which doesn't really help you out very much, has you bounce off the game, we've just lost someone to gaming. And that's a real shame. So one thing I'd really like to see is games that varied their tutorials and gave you an option at the start of the game. How much do you know about games? How much do you know about this game? And then we can not build the tutorial around you, but just give you 3 or 4 options that let you have in-depth or nothing and everything in between.
Is that the most we get is either enable or disable tutorials? That's all we get.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
I think Dark Souls is an interesting one because with Dark Souls, if Dark Souls is your first game, yeah, that's going to be a bit rough. And it's interesting because when the original Dark Souls came out, it was supposed to be a callback to the way very early games presented their tutorial, I guess, to players. It was figure it out. And Dark Souls went a bit further than most in that this is what the buttons do. Because I remember games from Super Nintendo where it's just like you're just playing the game. Press the button and see what happens, and then remember that. That's how you learn. And Dark Souls was very much like here are what the buttons do. Now you're on your own.
Yeah.
And I think that's an example where the tutorial fits the game very well, but is not necessarily a great tutorial. Because, I mean, when you get into the mechanics of Dark Souls and the players who are really good at Dark Souls, none of what makes them really good is anything they learned in the tutorial. It's hours of play, hours of analysis of how the game works, and then practice. And none of that is communicated in the tutorial. They don't really discuss iframes, which are a huge part of the way people play Souls games. They don't discuss parry timing. They might have a little text box that pops up and says, press this button to parry. And then when it doesn't work, people are like, all right, I don't know anything about parrying now. I just know that button does it and it didn't work. So I think that's the Dark Souls ones are an example of your tutorial matching kind of what you're trying to accomplish with the game. The tutorial is showing you like, hey, we're not going to hold your hand. We're not going to tell you how to play this game. Most of this game is about figuring out how to play this game. And it worked with Dark Souls, but I feel like now, as an adult who has limited time for gaming, I have less appreciation for that. If there's something relatively complex about your game, or if there's that difficulty in that learning curve where your tutorial feels like it didn't prepare me for the game at all, it's probably going to rub me the wrong way in those opening minutes. Whereas, when I was first playing Dark Souls and I had so much time to figure things out, it didn't bother me at all. So I think, I completely agree with you that if we could kind of cater the tutorial system to the way players approach a game, that would be better. But I do feel like we'd run into that issue where every player is just gonna be like, no, I don't need a tutorial. And then they're going to be 10 minutes into the game like, how the fuck do I do this? That was in the tutorial that you skipped.
I've been watching some here and there of the Ghost of Yotai, and apparently a lot of people are playing it and haven't played Ghost of Tsushima. And I don't think it's radically different as far as the gameplay is concerned, because I played lots of Ghost of Tsushima. Love that game. But one thing that the game suffers from is that it wants to be an action RPG, which it is. But some of the things that it tries to tell you, you have to pay attention, because they're actually really important to how you play the game. And if you're not paying attention to that and you miss it, you're going to get yourself frustrated. So I'm watching a lot of people getting themselves frustrated when there's like a little red flash that's not parryable. You have to dodge it. When it's a white or blue, you might be able to parry it. It's just a little flash. And I'm constantly seeing like, I did what I was supposed to. Why couldn't I? It said it in the thing, but because people are, and that's a good thing and a bad thing about the game, because people are invested into the story, but they're not paying attention to the very basic tutorial. So
I'd like to point out a secondary issue there. How many men are colorblind? What is it? 1 in 9, 1 in 10? A lot of people undiagnosed. There may be people who actually aren't even able to fucking see that. And they might not even know that they can't. That usage of color in games as a necessary descriptor, awful design. That's something that really chaps my asshole.
I do think there's a colorblind option on it, but also there's a black and white. So if you want, like I'll be able to understand what you're saying, because I do it in black and white too. So,
but I think that's oddly enough, it's not directly related to tutorials, but that idea of the colorblind mode in games, like I would say black and white is not a sufficient substitution, nor is colorblind mode. That's not a sufficient substitution. The key is to make sure that we don't need color in the first place to tell this apart if we want to have the game to be truly accessible. And in that sense, that's why I always feel that we do need tutorials that are wide-ranging, that teach us the very basics, because I want the game to be accessible to people to actually play this. But again, always in that staggered way, where we're not going to insist that every person who's ever already played 100 video games, we're not going to teach them how to use the left stick to run around. We're not going to teach them how to use the right stick. The art of tutorial making, though, I think is one of those things where as gamers we can often feel frustrated by it, but I think we also have to remember sometimes that game developers themselves are mostly gamers. People don't get into this business because of the money. It's generally not great. There's often very long working hours. People in higher up positions know that many of the people getting into this industry do it for the passion. So the working conditions don't tend to end up being that great. We end up here because we love it. Those people making those tutorials don't like those wordy, verbose, heavy-handed tutorials either. But one of the things that I've learned in more software development than video games is you generally need them anyway. Because people are really, really bad at picking up on what they're supposed to be doing when they're playing these games. They're really bad at picking up on what they're supposed to be doing when they're using software. You can give people the most obvious thing in the world to do. How many times have people picked up a new piece of software and pretty much just stared at the front page going, I don't know. And there's only 3 buttons. It just says new, load, and quit. And there's still that moment of, I don't know. So tutorials, they have this really difficult balance to strike between how much are we teaching the players to play a game, how much are we just actually sort of inviting people in to our game and giving them a nice, safe beginning. How much information do we need to communicate to even the longest and proudest of gamers who we simply can't trust to play this game properly without a little bit of guidance? It's a thankless task writing a tutorial. And I don't know how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah. And I won't rehash the Tsushima thing, but part of it is also, you're right, as far as the should be another option besides color. But the fact is that whenever, well, there is actually, because when you face somebody who has a certain weapon type and you're not trained to deal with that, you can't parry it. It's just cut off. So you should know this, but again, it's part of that whole, like, unless you've paying attention to what they're telling you, which again distracts from telling a story. You know, you're not immersed anymore. So I could totally understand why somebody would skip that part of it, but it is in there.
So as soon as you start presuming knowledge in a player from the game prior, to me that's it's almost you making the nails for your own coffin. Like, it's an absurd design decision. I haven't played Yotai, so I can't say to what extent they do it, and they might not even do it that badly.
I'd love to play it. It's on PS only though, so I'm locked out.
Even more reason you shouldn't be relying on that as previous knowledge for your game that is not console exclusive. There's a video that kind of addresses this that I've watched that I'm a big fan of, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before. It's a series of 3 videos called Sequelitis, and there's one that addresses Megaman and the Mega Man X tutorial sequence. And it talks about a lot of the way that you can teach a player how to play the game by just making them play the game. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to get your tutorial to stick, to actually land with a player and to give them, you know, that knowledge that they're not just going to forget because they kind of taught themselves how to do it, so that stays with them more than just somebody telling them. And in that video, they reference what I think is probably the shittiest tutorial, which is that very quick loading screen with a picture of a controller and then lines to each button that tell you what that button does. I challenge anybody to look at one of those and remember more than 2 buttons.
The biggest waste of time. The biggest waste.
I have to, every time I see one of those, I'm like, all right, what functions do I not know already? Try to find those and remember them. And maybe I'll pick one out and be like, oh, that's that button. And then forget about it 30 seconds later while I'm playing the game. But I do think we are still coming back to that variable engagement tutorial as kind of like the best idea that we can propose, because if I go back to every game and it's Mega Man X and I have to press each button and figure out what it does, there are more buttons on the controller now than there used to be. And some of them you're going to want combos of, hold left trigger in and press A. It's going to be a lot for me to just figure out on my own. And if your tutorial sequence is long enough for me to figure out all of that, I feel like it's going to drag a lot. It's going to be slow and it's going to be tedious. And it's going to be a lot of empty space where it's just like, try again, try pressing more buttons.
It's harder.
So, yeah.
Well, I think you also have to consider the type of game being made, because if we are building an X-Man? What's that game called? Megaman. X-Man. If we're building a Mega
X-Man.
What's it called? Megaman. If we're building a Megaman, if we're building a Hollow Knight.
This is exactly what I was talking about with that loading screen. I said Mega Man and Cobb couldn't remember 10 seconds later. Then he said Mega Man and still couldn't remember.
So, if we're building Mega Man, Hollow Knight, Gears of War, Last of Us, we know pretty much how these games work. And tutorials, we may not even have to explain that much, except to people who really want to be given a tutorial. So my suggestion for that would be variable tutorials, where you have the extreme option of, I need to be taught how these sticks work, and we have the example of, and we have the end of, I need no information, just let me at them, okay? But then what do you do about games like XCOM and Civilization? What do you do about games like Endless Legend? Stellaris? How do we teach these games to people? Because I've played Stellaris and I don't know how to play Stellaris because there's just so much going on. On the other hand, I thought XCOM did a pretty good job. But complex games with multiple mechanics, games that aren't the typical I'm staring through my character's eyes or from behind my character's shoulders and I'm running through these corridors. How do we explain those? And how do you variable difficulty those? Because Europa Universalis, which you talked about before, or Hearts of Iron, these games, they have what you might call a variable tutorial experience because it's in the menus. Go and click through the tutorials. But they're awful. They're really, really bad at explaining what's going on because they teach all these tiny systems in isolation from each other. And then you jump into the game and think, oh, gosh, which one am I supposed to do now? What am I even supposed to be doing? What game is this? And it always makes me wonder about, that big difference between games that you might consider traditional games and what you might consider complex games. And I know that's not a straight tree between the two.
Right.
But take my meaning.
I think one of the examples of a game that does that tutorial in a complex game system fairly well is Starcraft. And I think we've talked about this. If you play the Starcraft campaign, it does a very good job of gradually introducing you into the game mechanics. Because I think the first mission is just, here's a squad of Marines, go shoot things. And then the next one is, here's a squad of Marines and a hero unit and a bunker. Here's how bunkers work. Oh, and here's a barracks, so you can replace your Marines because they're gonna die. And you just gradually expand what the player is doing in each of those campaign sequences. The problem is that is a long tutorial. When you are playing through 8 missions of the tutorial of the campaign to figure out how to play Terran, you can't do much with the Terran story campaign. So it's a little rough. But for a more complicated and more strategic game, it's almost necessary to do it that way. You have to give your players the opportunity to learn a basic mechanic and then integrate it into a more complex mechanic gradually. And I think that's one of those situations where you find yourself looking at the game type and thinking like, all right, now we have a challenge with the tutorial. It's not, run to the right and jump occasionally. It's strategize. And teaching somebody to strategize is a very difficult task.
That actually reminds me, because I think I always thought XCOM did a very, very good job in the modern day. Not the classic XCOM, but modern day XCOM did a great job of tutorializing. And it's in the sense of their tutorial and their teaching you to play. So the tutorial, if you choose to do it, pretty much tells you exactly what you have to do. It's select this soldier. Oh, look, this square looks like a good spot. Let's walk there. Right click on square. Now you're going to shoot this one, and you're going to shoot this one, not that one, and the game doesn't give you the choice. So if you really want to learn how to play, that option is there. But let's say you skip the tutorial, because you just want to start. Well, the game, oddly enough, does a pretty good job of tutorializing, just by the fact that you start the game with rookies. So you can't really do anything except move and shoot, and throw a grenade. But then whenever we do introduce a new mechanic, we get a chance to actually get a little pop-up, tell you how this mechanic works. I'm not a huge fan of pop-ups, but those kind of games, I get it, it makes sense. And you get a chance to try that out, and maybe now a few missions later someone else levels up and you get to try a new system. I think it does quite a good job of tutorializing in that way, where it introduces new mechanics, gives you a chance to use them, and then builds a new one on top of that. And it does the same with enemies. You're going to start off XCOM 2, you fight just some human soldiers, but now 1 or 2 missions in, we're going to show you there's enemies with psychic powers. But then no one else is going to be introduced for 2 or 3 more. And you get a chance to keep dealing with it. And that's where we've seen, I think, that a lot of the great examples of tutorials in games, they do that, don't they? They build incrementally on what came before. And they teach you the game without you really realizing they're teaching it to you. And oftentimes they'll give you an almost safe space to learn these tactics. And I imagine that the key example of this, and probably the best tutorial I've ever seen, is Portal, where you are given these step-by-step little additions. You always get a very risk-free environment to try them in. Nothing is going to go terribly wrong if you just stand still and aim the portal kind of things. Nothing is going to go terribly wrong. If you start moving around and jumping, maybe. But at first, just to get used to mechanic, the game will just let you try it. And I think that's got to be the key as well to tutorializing and teaching people how to play games, is building slowly those Lego blocks as the game goes on, letting the player adapt to each one, and then not piling on too much information all at once.
Yeah, I do think you also touched on something that I just kind of want to highlight quickly with those pop-up menus, because I think I've seen those in a game I really like, but I think has an absolutely terrible tutorial, Baldur's Gate 3. I think Baldur's Gate 3 does a terrible job of telling people how to play the game, but it does something that is nice with that pop-up tutorial feature, in that you can just go into the menu and reset the tutorial, and it will come back with those pop-ups for every new mechanic. So if you haven't played the game in a long time and you've forgotten all of that stuff, now you have a system where you can just be like, yeah, tell me again, because I forgot. And I think that's something that's always really useful, especially if you take a long break from a game.
Yeah, if you don't know how to play Baldur's Gate 3, stream it, and the chat will tell you how to play Baldur's Gate 3.
Someone will tell you.
The greatest
if you
tutorial.
do know how to play Baldur's Gate 3, someone will still tell you.
I can't remember what game it was. When I was streaming it and someone told me what to do next, and I was like, well, we're not doing that then. And I can't remember what game it was, and I must have spent hours looking for some other way to do things. I will not be told.
Probably like Elden Ring or something. Yeah.
It might have been out
First fight, all things are possible.
Yeah. Merch available now, ish.
Yeah. Watch me speedrun this by glitching to the end credits, because it's the only other way to get past this other than following the directions I was given.
Now you have to beat the final boss and save the world.
Possibly jeopardizing the podcast crew here.
Again.
And alienating everybody. I'm going to say this anyway.
Wonderful.
The worst, by far, and it's not even close, the worst tutorial I have ever experienced in my entire life for a game that doesn't need it and continues to pile on every 20-30 minutes. Death Stranding. It is the worst tutorial because it never ends. I'm 100 hours into a game. Right now I'm at almost 150, but I was at 100 hours into the game, and I remember, why is it still telling me that if I'm stealthing in the reeds, that they can see me if my boxes are too high? And they're not. I only have like one box on me, but it's just casually telling me. And if you go
is this when he's muttering to himself? Is it those? Like, it's been a long time since
it's all over.
One.
It's not just once.
No,
it's all over.
What I mean is you're not getting a pop-up there, are you? Right? It's him muttering to himself, but he keeps saying the same damn thing.
It's a pop-up. It's a pop-up.
It's a long time.
And if you go into the it's notes, I think it's called. It's the tutorial thing, but it's called notes or something. It will take you 12 seconds from the beginning to end to scroll fast through it. Not to read it, just to scroll through it. It takes like 12 seconds. And every time you go to a new area or anything, it adds to it. And there could be 2, 3, 4 things it adds, and they're just not necessary at all. But again, it's not a detraction from the game, but it is the worst tutorial I've ever played.
That I would disagree on the lack of necessity for the notes section. For me, absolutely have that. Absolutely have that, and absolutely have that filling out so that we can have that as a reference. I've most recently played Death Stranding 2, and you have something similar, but I think it's done a different way now, where he mutters to himself a lot. So you go into tall grass, and he'll say something like, "Oh, my luggage might be a bit too high." That kind of thing, and it does great after a while. I always thought the tutorial, the actual teaching you how to play of Death Stranding, I thought was really, really well done. It's just the way that it keeps coming back up that gets frustrating. The text on screen, yeah. What bothers me more with pop-ups is when I have to click in them. Those are more the kind of pop-ups that I meant. So it's when the game pops up and says, okay, this pop-up will now take up the center of your screen. This sits here, and you've got to push OK, or whatever it might be. I think Death Stranding, it's kind of like text, like takes up like the bottom third of the screen or something, right? And you can still keep playing, but it's there and you don't want it because you're in there in this moment trying to immerse yourself in this situation. And now I've got the HUD between me and my immersion. Yeah, that's ringing more of a bell now. I think in 2, they got rid of some of that and replaced it with lots of mutterings and so forth. Yeah,
and it's not the fault of the voice actor or the writing even sometimes, but...
Oh, no, it's Kojima.
No, well, yes, but there are parts where he cannot help himself, because you'll have this really good conversation with the president and maybe even Fragile, and then you're kind of locked into the story and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and then suddenly Die Hard Man comes in and says the same goddamn thing in a more annoying way, and I'm like, shut the fuck up. Let me get out of here so I can do what I'm supposed to. Now I don't care. Now I suddenly do not care because I can't stand that guy.
My favorite description of it, he comes in and says the same thing in a more annoying way. This is us on the podcast. I think what you're seeing there is that is pure Kojima, and it's one of the buy-ins that you've made along the way as soon as you play his game. Like he has flaws in his storytelling, and I guess it's the price you pay to get all the weird goodness that you get with him. You get this weird badness as well, but some of it is so... You would think that the first playtester would say to him, you know this is shit, right? Can we not do this? But it's almost as though that never happened.
I think that is that's just something that highlights how special Kojima is, in that he is one of the few game producers who has gotten Legion to swear on the podcast.
Yeah.
Legion said, "Shut the fuck up."
Oh man, I just
that's a special talent right there.
Yeah. Add that to the accolades.
Yeah, Legion hasn't told either of us to shut the fuck up.
Verbally.
No.
Well, while we're recording,
because I like y'all. There's a big difference there.
He does do the editing.
Yeah.
But I think actually that does bring me just into more modern games. Claire Obscure Expedition 33, I thought generally did a very good job explaining its gameplay mechanics. It had that nice steady pace all the way through the game where you learn one mechanic, and we mentioned earlier about the idea of giving a player time to play with a mechanic. So Portal teaches you one thing, gives you a few rooms to play with it. Clay Obscure gives you 5 hours to get used to a mechanic before introducing something new. But I thought it was a really, really well-paced game in that regard. I can't remember what it's called. But there's the special counter with, I think it's the right trigger, whatever that's called. Can you remember?
Chromatic jump or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Were you going to say croissant? I really swear you were.
Croissant.
Chromatic croissant. That parry.
I'm gonna look it up, and if it says croissant, I'm gonna be like, duh, calm.
Should have known. That parry is introduced after how many hours of the game? It's really, really well done. I thought they introduced their combat mechanics perfectly. On the other hand, I think they did an awful job explaining how things like the Pictos and the a lot of the menu items worked. I didn't realize I was playing Final Fantasy VIII for a few hours, and that real massive link between the stats and the skills I was applying. So it's one of those peculiar games where they explain something really well, and they have this beautiful gameplay tutorial, but then their menu tutorial just let them down a little bit. And
yeah, I think I told you when I was playing that game, I didn't realize I was learning those Pictos for the entire party.
yeah,
I thought I was learning them per character, and I had to do that multiple times. And then I was looking at the symbols next to them, and I was like, this has like a check mark for everybody. I've been just being a dumbass for hours.
and
Lots of unnecessary fights.
And this is where you need to give yourself a bit more credit. It's just they didn't explain that bit that well. And I think that one almost in a way hurts more because it does such a good job with the gameplay tutorials. Like, I don't think you go through... The only problem I had with Clay Obscure gameplay-wise, combat-wise, was a color blindness problem in using Loon's powers when you can have more powerful spells depending on if you stacked up these counters from using her other spells.
Oh, the stains.
Stains, thank you very much. I think they explained it reasonably well, but a colorblind user couldn't use them. And I believe they've actually patched that out. I believe that got addressed in a patch a month or two after the game came out, but by then, of course, I'd already finished. But it was another example of just putting an accessibility bar in the game that just wasn't necessary whatsoever. But that was just one of those things. Generally, they explained their in-game concepts really well, to the point that you get to the end, Loon does not play like Ciel. Ciel does not play like Mael. Mael does not play like Gustav. Gustav does not play like Monaco. These characters all feel really different, but by the end, you know exactly what you're doing with all of them, and you can even switch out back and forth. And I think you might have one moment where you think, wait, was Monaco the one who... You might have that moment, but as soon as you get back into the fight, the game gave you so long with each character, it let you really experience each character, that you understood exactly how they all worked, even though they play completely differently. And they can only do that if they've explained well how you actually use these characters. So their general gameplay tutorial was really, really fantastic.
Banana said he didn't understand the Pictos, but I knew they were there. I didn't understand what the available points was. I'm like, what do I do with this? I'm like, and that was my currency to get more of those. And I could not make that association. So
my menu one with Clay Obscure was... Yeah, I think it was not realizing until too late that it was the junction system from Final Fantasy VIII, realizing just how important those stat boosts were. For some reason, that didn't attach to my brain until all of a sudden I was in one area getting absolutely demolished. All of a sudden, I just updated what ones I had attached, and my character just walked through the area.
And speaking of Final Fantasy VIII, how would you have felt if at the very beginning of that game they told you leveling up is a bad idea? A completely different game if they tell you that.
I thought you were going to say, how would you have felt if Clay Obscure had done the Final Fantasy VIII Junction tutorial that took 10 minutes of you smashing the X button to get through it? And I think, honestly... No, you can't
skip that in the remaster. You can't skip that in the original.
Yeah, the original is what I've played.
Yeah.
But that is the two examples, and it's quite tidy because it's the same system, basically, where Final Fantasy VIII just went overboard with this explanation that at the end, how many people played that game and never really understood the junction system? It's actually not that complicated. They just did a dire job of explaining how it works and did it all in one massive, here you go, learn, wham. That's it.
Yeah.
Clay Obscure, on the other hand, didn't teach you anything.
Also, how many people thought they didn't understand the junction system because they leveled up their characters to the point where they were struggling and were like, oh, I just must be doing this wrong. When no, what you did wrong was level up the characters in a JRPG.
You fool.
Yeah. If only 100% of other JRPGs hadn't told you that was a good idea.
The one nice thing about how it introduces its tutorial, as far as some of how, like you said, that Mayo doesn't play the same thing as CL and any of the other ones. But what's nice about that is that through the experience of gameplay, you understand the weaknesses and what the strengths are of each character. Like for me, Monaco, I would definitely use him as my support, but he's useless if I don't give him the skills. So he has to like actually fight people in order to unlock those abilities. So you have to actually use him for a while for him to be usable as the support person, as your backup group. And that's incredible. You have to like really through experimentation and application, you're almost doing a tutorial for yourself because of your gameplay style. And that is so unique. And again, that's why it's going to be game of the year, in my opinion. It just does everything really, really well.
I hope it isn't, but I think it might be.
I think one of the things that Claire does as well that is a very subtle thing in game design is recognizing the way a player is going to respond. So when you meet a new character in Claire, you're probably going to immediately put them in your party just to figure out what they're like and see if you like their gameplay. And that's how you learn to play as those characters in Claire. So in some cases, Claire will immediately throw you into a one-on-one fight after getting a new character. And it's like, well, I might as well figure out what Maëlle plays like now. She just joined the team. Let's see what her abilities are like in this one-on-one fight. And I can kind of compartmentalize and just focus on how Maëlle plays individually. And then once I get a good handle on that, I can think of how does this synergize with the other characters and what can I do with both of these. And I think that's just recognizing that when you present your players with something new, they're probably going to be a little bit curious about it, and it's probably going to be their next action to investigate that brand new thing. So giving them an opportunity shortly after they've been presented with something new to just dive into that new thing is a great way to kind of let them teach themselves.
I did have a pet peeve of tutorials, which is something that before we finish, I would like to address. And I remember it more in historic games tutorials rather than more modern games, but it's something that used to bother me. And I remember it in strategy games, it would happen quite often. And it's when a tutorial doesn't allow you to do something until they've expressly said this button does that. So if my character can jump with the button A, I hate it when you lock that away from me until you've told me I can jump with the button A. If my character can crouch by pushing in the stick, I despise if you don't let me crouch until you've told me you can do that. Because I feel that allows you possibly a way out of the tutorials for players who know how to do it. Put in that first room something on the left-hand side that maybe I can jump over and just get the fuck out of there. But maybe for the player who doesn't know what to do yet, make them crouch under something first before you unlock that jump button for them, and now in room 2, show them how to jump. But the locking away things until you told me how I can do it, despise it. And someone might look at that and say, and critiquing it sort of internally, and they might say, but you liking XCOM when the game only gives you certain abilities to begin with. I think you can explain it away in a much more plausible fashion by putting skills behind leveling up trees and things like that. I don't see it as quite the same thing.
I think in a very similar vein, the in less like action focused games where it's more strategic and you have to like choose an action from a menu. I cannot stand tutorials where it's like, okay, choose this item and target this enemy right now. And it's like, no. Telling me to do that is fine. If I do something else, let that happen, and then let the gameplay punish me for deviating from the obviously correct strategy. Don't just lock it away so that I can't make the mistake. Because if I want to be stupid, I will learn immediately why I shouldn't be stupid. But if you won't let me be stupid, I'll be waiting for the first opportunity to be stupid.
I love that you've just critiqued exactly what I complimented about the XCOM tutorial. Because I think it doesn't let you. Because I've never tried. I think when it says click this tile here and move there, I think it doesn't let you click another one. In hindsight, I'd quite like it if it did. Yeah, just to let me realize that no, full cover is a good thing. You don't want to be out in the main area. But I think it's because in the tutorial they give you one of the story characters who you're going to need to have, who doesn't generally participate in missions. I think it's like the base commander voice. So they can't have you get them killed. But now when you put it that way, maybe they should. In this case, just don't put the base commander on the mission. Give me some other guy.
Give me somebody expendable because I'm going to expend them.
Yeah. So I think I love the idea of them having a tutorial that doesn't let you do that. But at the same time, when you mention it, why not let the player mess up?
Well, there are some games that's locked behind the equipment that you're using. So Banana's been playing Plague Tale, the first one. That one, Alien Isolation and Little Nightmares have something very in common, where you're against opposition that is far more dangerous than you are capable of being. So it has this element of horror, but it's genuine horror because there's nothing you can do about it. So the only thing you can do is deal with the situation that you're capable of doing, and most of the time that's through stealth, right? But some of those things that you get for throwing mechanics or whatever are locked behind if you even have that equipment unlocked. So it's the tutorials locking the ability to do those things, but then again, you don't have the equipment that you even knew could do that. So it does that, I think, fairly well. Each one of those games does that. So
I do think there's you've kind of highlighted something else that you'll see usually a lot in like platformer games, in the idea of locking a function behind progression. So, your character hasn't learned to do this, or they haven't been given an item that makes it possible for them to do this, but you'll see the need for that before you get the ability. So, simple example in Paper Mario, some of the powers that you get because you're a piece of paper and you can kind of fold yourself up or shape yourself however, are activated on little platforms. And you see those platforms long before you get any of those abilities. And you immediately recognize them as like, oh, something special happens there. I don't know what it is yet, but I know that's clearly different from the rest of the floor that I'm standing on. And then you have this encounter and you get this new ability. And usually they explain what that ability is in tremendous depth in like Paper Mario 1000-Year Door. It's a little bit of overkill. But even if they were like, just look for this platform, press this button and see what happens, I feel like you'd be like, oh, okay, now I know what those platforms are for. Let's go try this out. And you would very quickly learn. I think that's another kind of unique thing you see in those platformer games primarily, but in those kind of like action games where you have to navigate the world, you'll see a lot of those hints in just kind of the world design before you get to actually using the ability. And I think that's another really effective way to get players ready for something before they even have the ability to interact with it.
Well, I think we've thoroughly covered tutorial systems. There's no need to revisit any other podcast besides ours for...
Yeah, I think we nailed it. Clearly defined the best tutorials ever.
Mm-hmm. I definitely can't think of another video that tackles these really, really well. No, sir.
But if you like the video, like it. Are there any comments that you want to have us engage in, then please put a
quick tutorial on how to subscribe to the channel.
There's a little button at the bottom that says subscribe now.
Oh, start off. How do you use the mouse?
Oh, yes. Well, or if you're even using a mouse, maybe you're using a...
You could tab your way through the screen.
That's true.
Useful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you're watching it on the TV, you can use the remote. Go down, little sub button there. I think it actually has a pop-up too when you get to the end.
I regret making the joke now.
Region doesn't.
But we will check you guys later. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.